In this video, I'm going to name who I believe to be every NFL team's most overrated player right now. I must stress this, being overrated does not necessarily mean that a player is bad, and quite honestly, in some cases, some teams really have no overrated players because nobody at large really cares about the team. They're irrelevant, so I had to do my best to try and find somebody for every team, and that's all that matters. I did my best like a hero would because I have a bunch of integrity. Anyway, the video begins right after this short break. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved meals right to your doorstep. Their team of gourmet chefs create each meal using only ingredients with integrity to help you feel your best all day long. Skip the overpriced takeout trap. Factor is cheaper and way more delicious. Get chef-crafted, restaurant-quality meals delivered right to your door. They're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, which means more time for you. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. You can also discover more than 60 add-ons every week, such as breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. I've been sponsoring Factor now for several years, and I can tell you with 100% sincerity, these guys are the real deal. If you have not yet joined Factor or have given Factor a try, you are missing out big time. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code 50berry to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50berry at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray. We are entering year 7 now with Mr. Murray, and it appears we're in the same exact position that we've been in the last several seasons, where we're all just trying to find out, is this best that Murray will ever be, or is there another level? At this point, I think he is who he is, but he still is a big name. There aren't a lot of big name players on the Cardinals, so it's not, again, that Murray is terrible, but he certainly, for a first overall pick, has not been as good as he should be. He's basically just a tease, and I think we have a large enough sample size now to realize that he's not a winning quarterback, and he also gets a lot worse as the season goes on. Atlanta Falcons, AJ Terrell. I was going to pick Kyle Pitts, but I think by now everybody knows that the jig with him is up. I was going to pick Kirk Cousins because he's super expensive and a backup, but I feel like everybody knows that he's super expensive and a backup, so nobody overrates him anymore. Therefore, I went with Terrell, who still is in good standing around the league despite having just 2 interceptions in the last 3 seasons and 6 interceptions total in 5 years as a pro. Former first overall pick from Clemson is not a bad player, but you would expect more splash plays considering his reputation. Baltimore Ravens, Jaire Alexander. There's no doubting Alexander's talent when he's healthy, which is the big problem. In the last 4 seasons, he's only been healthy 1 time, which was in 2022. Just take a look at his games played since 2021. 4, 16, and then 7 in each of the last 2 seasons. The Ravens, I sure are betting on him staying healthy to add to their defense, but it doesn't matter how good you are if you're not on the field, and despite his reputation as an elite cornerback, it appears that Alexander suffers from a severe case of Bob Sanders-itis. Buffalo Bills, Joey Bosa. Bosa is a big name, and he always has been a big name because he got off to a great start in his career, and also his younger brother Nick keeps up the headlines as well. The facts with Bosa are, much like with Jaire Alexander, that he just doesn't know how to stay healthy. The talent has never been in question, but he hasn't played a full season since 2019. When he's on the field, he can be a difference maker when he's on the field, that is. So despite being a big name and a good player, his impact is overstated simply because he's not out there enough to really warrant the reputation he has. Maybe he'll stay healthy in Buffalo this year and finally get them past Kansas City. I don't know, but I doubt it. Carolina Panthers, J.C. Horn. There's a current trend going on in this video, in case you haven't picked up on it yet. It's talented but injury-prone players getting the nod, and that's exactly what J.C. Horn is. For the first time in his young career, did he stay healthy, relatively, in 2024, showing his talent and justifying why he was a high first-round draft pick several years ago. But he's not out of the woods just yet, in my opinion, because I think he has to prove that it was more than just a one-year fluke and that his body can hold up. This has nothing to do with how he is as a player. It's It's more so the fact that can he prove and stay healthy and develop some consistency on the field. Otherwise, you're no better than just a fan in the stands when you're on IR. Chicago Bears, Montez Sweat. Some people might say Caleb Williams would be the good pick here, but I think it's a little bit premature. Montez Sweat was traded away from Washington a couple years ago to the Bears, made a Pro Bowl in 2023, and then kind of regressed a lot in 2024, despite being a big name and a former first-round draft pick. Basically, I don't think he's lived up to the hype since he got traded to Chicago, but we all know the Bears desperately need him to start playing up to his reputation if they actually want to see some turnarounds and some productivity in the Caleb Williams era. I have my doubts, though. Cincinnati Bengals, T. Higgins. T. Higgins is a great number 2 wide receiver. Again, in the old days, I would say no offense to Odell Beckham Jr., but I'm maturing, and I'm a mature person, and that's called growth. Either way, T. Higgins is a great number 2 receiver, and he plays on a team that gets a lot of high-profile games, but I think he might be such a little bit overrated because he gets to benefit with playing with Jamar Chase, who takes a lot of attention off of him, and he still isn't a dominant receiver. Basically, this comes down to, do I think he could be a great number 1 receiver? I don't know, but he gets talked about sometimes in that light when we've never seen him as the lead dog. No offense to Michael Vick. And for that, I'm going to say he's slightly overrated as a second banana who gets talked about like he's a first banana. Cleveland Browns, Jerry Jeudy. I would love to say Deshaun Watson for this, but I think at this point everybody knows that he sucks and he's washed up and has the worst contract possibly in sports history, so he's not really overrated anymore. And honestly, looking at Cleveland's roster, it's not like a lot of players besides Myles Garrett really get a lot of pub. That's why I went with Jerry Jeudy, who had a breakout season in 2024 and a Pro Bowl season in his first year with Cleveland. But again, I'm wanting to see if he can keep it up instead of having it just be a flash in the pan. Jeudy has always been highly thought of by teams, considering he was a 15th overall pick back in 2020, and Denver gave him every opportunity in 4 years to become that number 1 receiving option, and he never broke out. Once again, he's here not because he's bad, but because I want to see if he is more than just a one-year wonder. Dallas Cowboys, Dak Prescott. Is Dak Prescott a good quarterback? Yes. The reason he's here is because I am sick and fucking tired of having to hear about Dak Prescott every single year because he's on the Dallas Cowboys and they get 8 nationally televised games a year and they're constantly shoved down our throats despite the fact that they haven't won shit since Tupac was alive, okay? Every single year. What does this mean for Dak Prescott? What does this mean for his legacy? Who gives a fuck? The guy is going into his 10th season in the NFL, okay? He's had plenty of opportunities to get Dallas deep in the postseason, go on a run, and he hasn't done it. Just like his predecessor, Tony Romo. But because he plays for the Cowboys, we have to constantly hear about Dak Prescott, even though he is a loser. He's never won anything. In the big moments, come playoff time, you know he's going to shit his pants. And I'm sick of everybody giving this guy more attention than he really deserves. That's why he's here on the overrated list. Denver Broncos, Evan Ingram. Let's be real, nobody gives a shit about the Broncos. Nobody really gives a fuck about the Broncos outside of the Denver market. So finding a person who was overrated was somewhat difficult, but I went with Evan Ingram because he's had a bit of a career journey where he was a first-round pick for the Giants, and he sucked there, and then he kind of went to Jacksonville and revived his career a little bit, and all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh, he's good again. Here's the thing with Evan Ingram, though. For his career as a tight end, and he's 6'3", 240 pounds, he averages under 10 yards per catch, which is disgusting. And in fact, over his last 4 seasons, he averages 8.9 yards per reception. So he's a dink and dunk guy. His stats are okay, but he's not a super impactful player. He's also prone to drops still and fumbling the ball. So while he might be a somewhat big name because of his former draft status and being a former Giants player, he's a guy who is similar to a baseball player who might hit for a high batting average but has absolutely zero power, so their OPS sucks. That's what Evan Ingram is. And also, he's not a great blocker at all, too. Detroit Lions, David Montgomery. You know when you go out to a bar and you spot a hot chick, but then she has an uglier friend who kind of is getting in your way and trying to cock block you? That's basically what David Montgomery is to Jahmyr Gibbs. He is the less attractive attractive friend who is trying to cockblock you from getting with her much hotter friend. And by that I mean Montgomery takes carries away from Jahmyr Gibbs, even though Jahmyr Gibbs is far and away a better player and running back and more dynamic than David Montgomery in basically every way. Sure, Montgomery's good for some goal line touchdowns, but so is Jamal Williams. There's a lot of running backs that can score from the 1-yard line. There's not a lot of running backs who have the explosiveness of Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, whether or not they use David Montgomery to try and save Jahmyr Gibbs from being overworked, I don't know. But either way, I feel like he gets a lot of credit for a guy who really doesn't provide much more than being a goal line merchant. I mean, for Christ's sakes, the longest run of the season for him last year was 21 yards. Get out of my face with that shit. Green Bay Packers, Jordan Love. I've always felt this way about Jordan Love ever since he became the Packers full-time starter, is that people are kind of willing to overlook his flaws and his inconsistencies because they just expect him to become the next great Packers quarterback. Oh, well, we hit on our last two quarterbacks, Brett Favre and Rodgers. They both became first ballot Hall of Famers. So in time, Jordan Love will also become a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. Kind of like when you go to the slot machines and you get all sevens a couple times in a row, but you keep going. It's like the hot hand fallacy. And so you think the next one's going to hit too, and then it doesn't. That's how I feel about Jordan Love, where he's not a bad player, but I don't think he's a great quarterback. And he has been really bad in his last two playoff games, including last year where he was horrific versus the Eagles. Basically, he kind of has this clout and this standing in a lot of people's minds, to me, where, oh, well, he's the next Packers quarterback, so he'll become great just like Rodgers and Favre, when he really hasn't proven anything yet. He's very inconsistent. He's turnover prone. I just think that while good, he gets too much credit for things he hasn't done, at least not yet. Houston Texans, CJ Stroud. Now, this one might be a little bit controversial for a lot of people because Stroud had that historic rookie season and everybody thought that he was the next elite quarterback, going to be a consistently top 2 or 3 quarterback in the league every year. And then last year came around and he basically decreased and declined in every meaningful way. And based on the numbers last year, he was not a good quarterback, despite the fact Texans still won their division and made the playoffs. I do think there are some factors, obviously, that go into that. The offensive line was not great, but at the same time, he was hyped up, much like how Jaden Daniels is getting hyped up currently after a great rookie season. That's what Stroud was last year, but he was not able to avoid the sophomore slump. We will see about that with Daniels, but Stroud really slumped last year. In the long run, I think that Stroud will be okay, but right now, I think a lot of people are a little bit too willing to overlook some of the flaws he had last season and put too much stock into his rookie year. Quite honestly, at this point, I don't know which way CJ Stroud's career is going to go. Is he just going to end up being a slightly above average quarterback who is going to tease everybody based on his great rookie season? Or will he bounce back and show that his rookie season wasn't a fluke? I don't know, but there are things and work that he has to do that some people, I think, are afraid to really mention or talk about. Indianapolis Colts, Quentin Nelson. I'll be honest with you, I don't know really anybody on the Indianapolis Colts. They are the most, or one of the most irrelevant teams in the league right now. It's such a far cry from the Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck years where they were really must-see television, but now they're just so boring. They're mediocre. There aren't a lot of players that really stand out. So Nelson kind of gets this by default. He had a really Hall of Fame type start to his career where he was making first-team All-Pros his first 2 or 3 seasons, and it looked like he was going to be the next lock for the Hall of Fame, similar to a Zach Martin. But over the last couple years, his play seems to have declined a bit. He still is a good player. I believe he was a second-team All-Pro a year ago even, but he really is the most well-known player on the Colts, I believe, casual fans who might still think that he is that dominating first-team All-Pro player that he was his first couple years, and he hasn't been that for a while, but he is still young enough and he's still good enough at a base level to where, can he get back to those early career stages and levels of dominance that he had? We'll have to wait and see. I think he can, but he has to go out there and show it. Jacksonville Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence. I almost didn't put Lawrence here because I feel like a lot of people are starting to catch on to the jig with him where, okay, we've been waiting for you now for 4 years. This is going to be his 5th season in the league, and we're still waiting for you to break out. We thought that you broke out in 2022, the second half of 2022, when the Jaguars went on that run, and then they had that massive playoff comeback versus the Chargers, and oh, Lawrence has finally arrived. He's finally come here, and then they regressed. And then last year, he got hurt, and even before he got hurt last year, his numbers weren't great. So we're just consistently waiting for Lawrence to finally break out and become one of the next great quarterback, and I think a lot of people are finally starting to realize realize I don't know if it's going to happen. But there are still enough believers in Trevor Lawrence because of his draft status and because of his status as the next great quarterback that they're still willing to put him in rankings over guys like Jalen Hurts, which is hilarious. And that's why I still think he's overrated, but he's not quite as overrated as he might have been a year or two ago, because there are a lot more people criticizing him. But still, as of this moment, I think he's overrated. Kansas City Chiefs, Travis Kelce. You still hear it all the time when people talk about Mahomes. Oh, well, he's got Travis Kelce. He's got a Hall of Famer at tight end. This Travis Kelce in 2024 and 2025 is not the same Travis Kelce as 3 or 4 years ago. Last season, he was a dink and dunk merchant. He couldn't get separation. He had a beer belly. And look, we all know that he spends a lot of time having coitus with his girlfriend, Taylor Swift. Maybe that's caused him to gain some weight and lose some of his passion for the sport. I don't know. But Kelce is a superstar in name only. Will getting his shit pushed in the Super Bowl by Philadelphia motivate him to get back to his prior status? I don't know. But whenever you see people use him in debates to try and discredit Patrick Mahomes, call them out on it, because although he will be in the Hall of Fame and although he is one of the best tight ends of all time, he is no longer at the impact level of a Hall of Fame tight end, and people should stop using him as a way to discredit Mahomes. A superstar in name only. Las Vegas Raiders, Christian Wilkins. This was a pretty telegraphed decision last year when the Raiders signed Wilkins away from Miami. They gave him a bunch of money and they were basically banking on him continuing to improve, and that's not what happened. Wilkins dealt with injuries and was basically non-existent, and so that's why he's here. I know a lot of people don't really give a shit about the Raiders. Tom Brady's like the most famous member of the Raiders organization now, and he's not even a player. So when you look at it in terms of contract money and getting paid, Wilkins gets my nod for the most overrated Raider, although I think most casual fans might not even know who he is. Los Angeles Chargers, Najee Harris. I tell you, I came this close to putting Justin Herbert in here, especially since a lot of people still think he's better than Jalen Hurts, even though he's literally shown nothing in the postseason. But I just couldn't do it because Herbert, for all of his flaws and for him being if man and hypothetical man, does do a lot of good things and does have a lot of talent and is a good player, and he does get a decent amount of criticism. So I just kind of went with Najee Harris, who has run for 1,000 yards in every season of his career thus far, but in 4 seasons and over 68 games played and nearly 1,100 carries in his career, he has never run for more than 37 yards on any carry, despite the fact that he is somewhat big name in the running back market. He just really isn't that great of a player. I don't know what else to say. There's a reason the Steelers gave up on him after his rookie contract ended. I called this from the start, by the way, just not bragging or anything, but I'm kind of bragging. Los Angeles Rams, Devontae Adams. I really don't feel comfortable with this decision, honestly, but I still went with it because Adams a couple years ago was in the discussion for best receiver in the league, and he's kind of dipped a little bit. He still is a good receiver, a still 1,000-yard receiver, still gets a bunch of touchdowns, a decent amount of touchdowns every year, but the last 2 seasons he hasn't made a Pro Bowl, he hasn't been on any All-Pro teams. If there's any quarterback who history shows will get his top target a bunch of stats, it's Matthew Stafford, as he did it with Cooper Kupp, as he did it with Calvin Johnson, he did it with Puka Nacua. So I kind of expect Adams to have a bounce back year, but I can't really think of any other Los Angeles Rams players that are so highly thought of at this point that are also overrated. So Adams is really the odd man out. I still think he belongs in the Hall of Fame someday, and he's certainly a lot better than Devin Hester. But as of right now, I guess he gets this award that I'm sure he doesn't want, but I have a feeling he'll prove me wrong. Miami Dolphins, Minkah Fitzpatrick. Yes, I made this Photoshop all by myself of what Minkah Fitzpatrick would look like in a Dolphins uniform because I am so immensely talented and humble and a man of integrity, and it's not definitely because Minkah Fitzpatrick used to play for the Dolphins before he got traded to the Steelers. That's right, the Steelers gave up on Minkah Fitzpatrick after 6 seasons because they wanted to acquire Jalen Ramsey, so they traded him back to the team that they traded him to in 2019, so now he's back where he belongs. Fitzpatrick has been a 3-time first-team All-Pro, he's been a 5-time Pro Bowler, but his play has dropped off since 2023. Over the last 2 seasons, for his reputation as an elite ball hawk, he has just 1 interception over the last 2 years, and last season, in coverage, he gave up 4 touchdowns and a 127.6 passer rating, so he's a big name, but his play is starting to decline, which is why he gets put here. Minnesota Vikings, Aaron Jones. Jones, to me, will always be a massive tease, and I've said this for many years, even when he was on the Packers, when they were at their best with Rodgers and they were competing for NFC championships, right? He's a guy that he's had some durability issues. He's somewhat fragile. He's a very explosive back, like a really all or nothing back, but he is very inconsistent. He'll have several games every season where he looks like one of the best 2 or 3 running backs in the league, and then he'll just go a little period where he doesn't really do anything and you kind of forget about him. He's also prone to fumbling the ball, which has happened especially in the playoffs at some pretty pivotal moments in the playoffs, which isn't great. So he is a good player, and I know he wears that huge hat, the sombrero, and everybody kind of falls in love with it, whatever, but he is a bit more of a big name at this point than he is a gamer. New England Patriots, Stefon Diggs. Life in the NFL goes by fast. Stefon Diggs started out his career as kind of an under-the-radar type of guy in Minnesota, a good receiver in Minnesota. Then he gets traded for Justin Jefferson, goes to Buffalo, becomes a great receiver, makes a couple all-pro teams, but he has kind of fallen off the map pretty quickly. Last year, his only year with Houston, he appeared in just 8 games before going down for the season. But in those 8 games, his per-game stats were still worse than they were the year before, which in 2023 were also worse than what they were in 2022. So Stefon Diggs is a player who I believe is in decline. He's going to be 31 and 32 by mid-season. There's also some off-the-field shit that's really concerning that people have kind of just swept under the rug with him. I think he's a big name again, but he's definitely not at his peak anymore. But hey, maybe Drake May can rejuvenate his career. I doubt it, though. New Orleans Saints, Cam Jordan. Again, this really isn't because Cam Jordan is like super overrated or anything. It's more so a fact of nobody really gives a shit about the Saints, especially since Drew Brees left, and especially now that Derek Carr is gone. They're just a shitty team in Louisiana again, which is basically what they were for most of their existence prior to 2006. But Cam Jordan has been the one constant over the last 14 years in New Orleans. He's missed only a handful of games, incredibly durable. He was an all-pro for a couple years there at his peak, but now he's 36 years old. He has just 6 sacks over the last 2 seasons. He's a jovial personality. He's a guy that the league likes to promote. I'm sure he'll have a very long and successful career in broadcasting or as a podcaster once his career is over with, but I think, we're at the end of the road here with Cam Jordan, or we're at, the sun is almost set on his career as a football player, and that's why he gets the nod here. New York Giants, Andrew Thomas. How do you find an overrated player for a team that everybody thinks and agrees is dog shit, even fans of that team? Well, I went with Andrew Thomas because he's actually one of the few players on the Giants roster that, at one point or another, has actually shown the ability to be a good NFL player. The problem is that after being named second team All-Pro in 2022, he's dealt with a lot of injuries over the last 2 seasons, appearing in just 16 games total. Now, he's a former 4th overall pick. He's 6'5", 315 pounds. The talent has always been there, but again, like a lot of my other choices, doesn't matter how talented you are if you're on the sidelines. When you're on the sidelines, you're no better than some drunk guy in the stands at the end of the day, if you really look at it. So Andrew Thomas, I guess just by default, is the most overrated Giants player because he's one of the few big names and one of the few actually talented players in the Giants that hasn't produced over the last several seasons because of injuries. But he still is only just 26 years old, so hopefully he has plenty of career left ahead of him. New York Jets, Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is a good player. Garrett Wilson is a good receiver, but he is not a dominant receiver. He is not a dynamic receiver. He has a good highlight or two, like that one-handed catch, I believe, versus Houston last year, but he really is a guy who he's not a Jamar Chase. He's not a Justin Jefferson. He's not going to get a shitload of yards. He's not going to rack up a bunch of touchdowns. He's got some nice hands. He'll make some splash plays occasionally, but to me, if he couldn't break out last year with Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams around him, then I don't see how he's going to be any better now that he's got a gigantic-ass contract extension that's paying him like an elite receiver, when I think he's a good receiver, but not a great one. And I think the Jets overpaid for him. Putting it another way, I would say that Garrett Wilson is the Kevin Durant of Terry McLaurin. Philadelphia Eagles, Jordan Davis. As an Eagles fan, I am just tickled pink by the amount of talent that we have on our team and the fact that we're set up both for the immediate future and the distant future. We just won the Super Bowl. We should be in contention for the Super Bowl for at least the next next 3 or 4 years. We've hit on a lot of our draft picks, but the one high draft pick in recent memory that, in my opinion, has disappointed has been Jordan Davis. We all know Jordan Davis is a gigantic human being, and we all know he plays interior defensive line, so I'm not expecting him to go out there and get 15 or 20 sacks a game or a season. Okay, I'm not expecting superstar huge numbers, but there are so many times during games where I just completely forget that Jordan Davis is out there. He's not as impactful as he should be. Jalen Carter has already completely lapped him, no pun intended, in terms of impact, and he came in a year later than Davis. I can't really remember a single great play that Jordan Davis has made in a big moment. I guess he's good when it comes to stuffing the run simply because he's just such a huge human being, but I don't know. I feel like when you draft a guy 13th overall, you're expecting more than just a run stopper or a lane clogger, and you're certainly expecting more than just 90 tackles and 3.5 sacks. I will say this though, he did have a sack in both the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl last year, so maybe he's finally turned a corner, which if he has, then the Eagles should be even more dominant than they already are, which is a terrifying thought for the rest of the league. Pittsburgh Steelers, Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is always going to be revered for his talent and his ability and his highlight reel throws, and rightfully so, because he's one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. He's a future first ballot Hall of Famer. He does have, in my opinion, the best arm talent ever. He does have, in my opinion, greatest highlight reel of any quarterback ever. But the Aaron Rodgers that the Steelers are getting and are banking on carrying their team back to relevancy is not the same Aaron Rodgers from the Obama administration or even a couple years ago when he won a couple MVPs. He hasn't had a good season since 2021. You never know if he's going to get injured. He just seems to be washed up. Although there were moments last year with the Jets where he had some good games and he showed flashes of the old Rodgers. And to be fair, I think the Jets' 5-12 record was a little bit misleading and not all his fault because they had some bad special teams play. But the days of Rodgers being a productive elite quarterback are gone. I feel confident in saying that. But because he's on the Steelers, he could end up throwing 5 touchdowns in 17 games, and the Steelers will somehow find a way to finish 9-8 or 10-7 and get blown out in the wild card round. That's just how it goes. But Aaron Rodgers at this point of his career is overrated. San Francisco 49ers, Christian McCaffrey. What am I going to say? You can already tell what I'm going to say. Injury prone, injury prone, injury prone. Not durable, not reliable. When he's on the field, he's an all-pro caliber player, as we've seen. But when he's not playing, and he's only playing 4 games a year, and he's missing a shitload of time, what difference does it make? The 49ers gave him a ton of money, and he usually does a good job of repaying them when he's on the field, but he has a history of injuries and missing seasons. You never know what you're going to get with Christian McCaffrey. If he stays healthy, there's no reason why he shouldn't be great again, but if he stays healthy, if you have to make a qualifier every time you talk about a player with, if he stays healthy, then they're probably overrated and unreliable, and that's what Christian McCaffrey is at this point, despite his talent. Seattle Seahawks, Cooper Kupp. It was a huge deal in the offseason when Cooper Kupp left the Rams for the Seahawks because did you know that he went to college at Eastern Washington? And Eastern Washington, holy shit, that's in the state of Washington. And guess what else is in the state of Washington? That's right, the city of Seattle, which is the team that Cooper Kupp plays for now. Isn't that great? It's a homecoming for a guy who, again, has that legendary 2021 season on his resume that nobody can take away from him, blah. But he's older. He's dealt with injuries for most of his career. He is not the same guy who was the best receiver in the league a couple years ago when he was with the Rams, okay? Even when he's been on the field, which has been a struggle for him, he played 9 games in 2022, 12 games each of the last 2 seasons. He's good to miss about almost half the season. Even when he's been on the field, his numbers and efficiency have declined, but he's a big name, so he got a lot of attention this offseason. Still, I just don't think that he is going to revive his career, and I think he's still living a little bit off of that 2021 season, and I just think it's time to move on from that. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Lavonte David. Lavonte David has been in the league since Aaron Hernandez was playing for the Patriots. Yes, that is a true fact. He's had a phenomenal career. In fact, he leads all current players in career solo tackles with over 1,100. He has 1,600 total tackles. He's won a Super Bowl. He's been a Pro Bowler. He's been an All-Pro. He's been a second-team All-Pro a couple times, and he still has some juice left in the tank, but I kind of just picked him by default. It was either him or Mike Evans, and I just decided to go with David because the Buccaneers defense wasn't great last year, and I feel like, for every great player, I don't know if he'll be a Hall of Famer. He's kind of in that kind of London Fletcher type of tier where, they're borderline Hall of Famers, and I think he could be there with his consistency and his durability. But at a certain point, I think every player hits the wall no matter how great they are, except for Tom Brady for some reason, fucking Antichrist. But I think it's time for David. I think he's getting a little bit up there in age, but he still is a big name. Still a good player, but I don't think he's the great player that he was for most of his career. Tennessee Titans, Calvin Ridley. Again, who gives a shit about the Titans? They don't have really any relevant players except maybe Will Levis, who is famous because he sucks. So how can a guy be overrated if he's famous for sucking and making plays and turnovers and stuff? So I guess I just went with Calvin Ridley because he's one of the few players on their roster that's actually kind of good enough to be overrated. He's not a dominant receiver. He's not a top tier receiver, but he's good enough for 1,000 yards and a couple touchdowns every year. Maybe Cam Ward will unlock him. I don't know, but we all know Calvin Ridley is a risk taker, so I wouldn't be surprised this year if he hits on a couple deep throws from Cam Ward. But still, I guess he's the most overrated by default, just because he's the biggest name really on the roster. And finally, Washington Commanders, Terry McLaurin. McLaurin is a fan favorite. Everybody loves Scary Terry. He's a good player. He's a consistent player, durable, right? And last year was the first year of his career where he caught more than 7 touchdowns in a season. He had 13 touchdown catches last year. He has a couple really nice highlight catches over the course of his career, but he's never been a dominant receiver. He's never broken 1,200 yards in a season. Last year, like I said, he had 13 touchdown catches, which is amazing, but is he going to duplicate that? Maybe, maybe not. He's currently in some contract disputes with the franchise and the front office, so who knows? Jaden Daniels might have been a godsend for his career, but like I said before, where Garrett Wilson was like the Kevin Durant of Terry McLaurin's, like Terry McLaurin is the Terry McLaurin of Terry McLaurin's. He's like a guy who is in that top 10 to 15 range that some people overrate, right? Because of some nice highlight. He's a very good receiver. I don't think he's a great receiver, but would I like him on the Eagles? Absolutely. But still, overall, compared to the way some of the media talks about him, I think he's a little bit overrated, and he gets the nod here.